The tulips are in full bloom on Michigan Avenue. During the pandemic, it seemed that flowers and trees carried on almost in order to spite us. They didn't know what was going on. We sometimes mistakenly think the world revolves around us. In the new book, James, by Percival Everett, he chronicles the story of Huckleberry Finn from the viewpoint of the secondary character of Jim, the traveling companion of Huckleberry Finn. It's not a new approach. It's a literary technique, which has more to do with being derivative than it has to do with race. We can look to The Great Gatsby, the story of Citizen Kane, and even Gone with the Wind. Scarlett O'Hara was a secondary character from the perspective of the Civil War. Huckleberry Finn was the secondary character in the original book, Tom Sawyer. Even in the Bible, Christ is the secondary character created by God of himself to tell the story of the Hebrew people. They tell us the economy is doing just great, but there are rumblings about pressure on national retailers and slowing industrial leasing. It may lead to the collapse of Michigan Avenue as the economic engine for the state. Yes, the tulips are in full bloom on Michigan Avenue, but they don't know anything about this bad news because they're tulips. They they just look good. Welcome. Welcome to Sunday Coffee Hour. I'm Stanley Smith. At Sunday Coffee Hour, we talk about everything and nothing. This Sunday, we talked about being colorblind, rationing healthcare, being socially savvy, and minimizing women. The readings at Washington National Cathedral were from Acts. Heaven is in Technicolor, but we're watching it on a black and white TV. And from John, we're everything, one thing at a time. The gospel reading was from Luke. It was about Christ. Christ is the Good Shepherd. The sermon at Washington National Cathedral was by Rose Duncan. Rose preached about how we can't really know Christ unless we understand who he is. She then proceeded to start explaining to us who he is. It's a tired old story, and we've heard it before. It implies that if you don't get it right, then you're going to miss out on winning the prize. They say all religions are man-made, and that religion is not even a religion because we have a conscience, and God finds us there. It's not so much about knowing as it is about experiencing. We can be marginalized into a secondary character by our needing to know and understand everything. Christ came as the secondary character to tell a story on himself by showing the humanity of our marginalized selves. Sometimes it's the best way to tell a story. At St. James, Chris preached about the Good Shepherd. He told us it was Good Shepherd Sunday, as if it was an industry term. He said he's always afraid he's going to preach the same sermon he preached last time. Chris said, luckily, the New York Times seems to come out with an article about sheep or shepherding once every 4 years. It's like the lectionary of the New York Times. Chris said we can be predisposed to certain outcomes based on social, cultural, and genetic factors. We're good at focusing on getting through trauma, but not so good at dealing with it or recovering from it. Trauma is internalized, and then we deny that part of ourselves. The trauma of 9/11, the 2008 financial collapse, and the pandemic. During the pandemic, Lisa preached about how she felt the flowers in the neighborhood were mocking her by blooming during the pandemic. They didn't know what was going on, but it didn't seem quite right. Chris said doing what's right often has nothing to do with morality. We're all playing a secondary character in the lives of our own disbelieving. Someday, when we all get to heaven, we'll all have a good laugh about it. In an analysis of producer David O. Selznick and director Alfred Hitchcock, there's a considerable thought and discussion given to the difference between being a director and being a producer. Producers are interested in every aspect of the work, and directors are more interested in key shots which move the story along. We tend to remember directors as being great directors, and producers are usually remembered for one principal work. In the filming of the 1940 adaptation of Daphne du Maurier's book, Rebecca, director Alfred Hitchcock and producer David O. Selznick clashed. The story of Rebecca was about a namesake character we never see, and a heroine who has no name. In Percival Everett's new work, James, we have the premise that the character of Jim is marginalized. He's marginalized because he's Black. Psychology tells us we have 6 psychological responses: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust and surprise. We ignore most of these responses as socially unacceptable. We have a limited range of response, and then we layer in social modifiers to rein these in even more. Is it any wonder we feel marginalized? Language can be rich and nuanced, but most of us use it simply to communicate instead of expressing how we feel. Living in Chicago, no one wants to know how we feel. It's a psychology we embody, and then we carry it into our relationships and into our relationships with civic institutions, the state, and national politics. And then it's on to the world stage, which is just about to erupt into World War III. Yes, it's springtime in Chicago. The tulips are in bloom. They don't know how bad things are because they're tulips. They don't have a name or much of a role to play, but they're smiling anyway. And that's the best story we can tell. If you would like to join us at Sunday Coffee Hour is every Sunday at 12 noon Central Time on Zoom. I will include my email in the description of this video, and I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.